Snow fell thick outside Bridger's trading post, each flake catching firelight through frosted windows. Inside, the scent of pine smoke and old leather filled the air. Nathaniel Bridger sat in his worn rocking chair, the leather creaking with each gentle movement. 67 years had carved lines deep into his face, but his eyes remained sharp alert, the eyes of a man who had spent decades reading wilderness for signs of danger. His grandson William stood by the window, watching snow blanket the valley below. The young man's shoulders carried a tension that had nothing to do with the weather. His packed valise waited by the door. Tomorrow morning, the train would carry him to San Francisco, to a job with the railroad company, to a world his grandfather had spent a lifetime avoiding. "I'm afraid," William said suddenly, his breath fogging the glass. Nate looked up from the leather journal in his lap, its pages worn soft from years of reading. Of what? The city. Not knowing how to deal with. William turned from the window. With bad men. You've always said there are dangerous people out there. The fire popped. Embers drifted up the chimney. Nate closed the journal slowly, deliberately, the way a man handles something precious. He gestured to the chair across from him. William crossed the room and sat. His grandfather's hands, scarred from 1,000 small injuries, rested on the journal's cover. "There's a story you need to hear," Nate said, "about the woman in that photograph." He nodded toward the mantel. A sepia image showed a woman with gentle eyes and dark hair pulled back simply. She stood beside a younger version of Nate, the two of them in front of the very building they now occupied. "Grandmother Catherine, you told me she was a nun once." "She was, before she became my wife." William blinked. "But nuns can't marry. They take vows." "Exactly." Nate opened the journal to its first page. Handwriting faded but legible filled the yellowed paper. "And that's the important part of this story, about how sometimes doing the right thing means breaking every rule you were taught, even the rules of God." He found the passage he wanted written in his own hand 3 decades earlier. August 17th, 1873. "The day I found her dying and evil showed its face." This story is about knowing when a man must fight. Nate continued, his voice taking on the quality of distant thunder. About how sometimes God puts people in each other's paths for reasons that only make sense later. He met his grandson's eyes directly the way he'd once held the gaze of hostile warriors across a rifle barrel. "You're about to meet men like Father Matthias Crow, the man I faced that year, a devil who wore a priest's collar and did hell's work behind a cross. Before you go, you need to know how to recognize evil, no matter how it dresses itself." The fire crackled. Outside wind drove snow against the windows in waves. The story begins on an August day in 1873 when I found a nun beaten nearly to death on a mountain trail and learned that some monsters hide in plain sight. Nate settled back in his chair, journal open on his lap, and his voice took on the cadence of memory. The Sierra Nevada in August burned with a heat that could kill the careless. 7,000 feet above the Sacramento Valley, Nathaniel Bridger had built his life around solitude. The cabin stood in a meadow rimmed by pines, a single room of hand-hewn logs chinked with mud and moss. He'd raised every wall himself after leaving the army, after the cholera took Sarah and Emma, after he'd decided that mountains made better company than men. 5 years he'd lived alone. Preferred it. The rhythm of wilderness suited him in ways civilization never had. Dawn meant checking trap lines strung along the creek that fed his meadow. Morning meant hunting or fishing depending on season and supply. Afternoon brought the work of tanning hides, stretching pelts on willow frames, preparing the furs that would eventually fund his annual supply run. Evening meant maintenance cooking, the small rituals that kept a man alive in country that forgave nothing. Once a year he descended, packed his mule with bundles of beaver pelts, marten the occasional fox. 3 days to Henderson's trading post in the foothills where valley met mountain. Trade furs for coffee powder, lead salt, the few things wilderness couldn't provide. Then 3 days back to his meadow, to his solitude, to the silence that asked nothing of him. August 17th began like any other supply run day. He loaded the mule while the sun still hid behind eastern peaks. The pelts from 6 months of trapping made a decent load, enough to fund another year. His route never varied. Follow the ridge, south and east, descend through the foothills. Reach Henderson's by the 3rd evening. The Sharp's rifle rode in its scabbard on the mule's saddle, always loaded, always ready. 5 years in these mountains had taught him that preparedness wasn't paranoia. It was survival. By afternoon of the second day, he descended into the lower elevations where pine gave way to scrub oak and manzanita. The heat pressed down like a physical weight. His cavalry hat kept sun off his face, but sweat still ran down his back, soaking the buckskin shirt that had seen better years. Then his neck prickled. A scout learned to trust that feeling. During the war, that prickling had saved his life more times than he could count. Something was wrong. He couldn't say what, couldn't point to any specific detail that triggered the warning. But 34 years of survival had wired his nerves to read danger the way other men read newspapers. He stopped the mule, listened. Silence. Too much silence. No bird calls, no insect drone, just stillness, and underneath it, something else. A smell. Copper. Blood. Recent. Nate tied the mule to a manzanita, pulled the sharps from its scabbard, checked the load without thinking. The rifle felt like an extension of his arm, familiar as his own hand. He moved into the scrub silent despite his size, a trick learned from tracking Cheyenne warriors who could disappear in country with no cover at all. 50 yards, 70. The smell stronger now. 100 yards from the trail in a shallow ravine, cut by spring runoff, he found her. A body lay sprawled in the dirt, black and white fabric, torn and filthy. He approached slowly, rifle-ready eyes scanning the surrounding brush. Could be a trap. Could be bait. Men did worse things than this for an ambush, but the ravine stood empty except for the woman and the flies already gathering. He knelt beside her rifle, never leaving his hand, and turned her gently onto her back. The face looked barely human, both eyes swollen completely shut, skin purple, and black with bruising. Blood matted dark brown hair to her skull. Her lips had split in multiple places, crusted with dried blood. More blood stained the front of her dress. Her hands showed defensive wounds, knuckles scraped raw, wrists bruised deep purple, as if someone had gripped them hard enough to break bone. But the dress itself told a story. Black fabric torn nearly to rags. White coif ripped away, leaving only tatters. A wooden rosary broken, its beads scattered in the dirt around her. A nun. Someone had beaten a nun and left her to die. Christ, Nate breathed. He pressed two fingers to her throat. The pulse fluttered, weak and irregular, but it beat. Still alive. Barely. He scanned her injuries with eyes trained by 5 years of treating his own wounds and the occasional hunting accident. This wasn't random violence. The pattern spoke of intention, of cruelty applied with purpose. Bruises ringed her throat, finger-shaped where someone had tried to strangle her. Burns marked her forearms circular, like cigar ends pressed into flesh. Her dress had been torn in ways that suggested assault, though he couldn't tell if the assault had been completed or merely attempted. Then he saw her shoulder where the black fabric had been ripped completely away. A brand. Fresh, still oozing clear fluid around angry red tissue. The mark showed clear despite the damage. 2 letters formed with care. PC, the bottom dropped out of his stomach. Pacific Consortium. He knew those initials. Every scout who'd served in California during the war knew them. Whispers in officers' tents about girls disappearing, about a trafficking ring that operated with impunity because it had connections reaching all the way to Sacramento, maybe to San Francisco itself. Girls branded like cattle before being shipped to brothels. This nun hadn't been randomly attacked. She'd been marked for sale and had somehow escaped, which meant whoever did this would be looking for her. Nate could leave her. Should leave her, probably. Getting involved with trafficking rings tended to end badly for everyone except the traffickers. He could ride on to Henderson's conduct, his business, a return to his mountain, his solitude, his safe isolation from the ugliness men did to each other. But a voice in his head spoke with Sarah's gentle certainty. You have a good heart, Nate. Don't let grief harden it completely. And another voice, higher, sweeter, the voice of a 4-year-old girl who'd believed her papa could fix anything. You always help people, Papa. God damn it, he said to the woman, to himself, to the memory of a wife and daughter 5 years dead. He committed. His hands moved with efficiency born of necessity. Canteen from his belt, precious water on a bandana, gentle dabs at her face to clear blood from her nose and mouth. She needed to breathe clearly, needed hydration, needed treatment for wounds that would kill her through infection if the dehydration didn't get her first. He tore strips from his own shirt to bind her ribs. Palpating carefully, he felt at least 3 breaks, maybe 4. Broken ribs meant careful transport or a punctured lung. A punctured lung meant death. She stirred as he worked, a whisper barely audible. Father, please, the children. Shh, you're safe now. Her eyes didn't open, probably couldn't through the swelling, but her hand moved, fingers grasping weakly at his sleeve. No, no one's safe. He'll find them. Kill them all. Then she went limp again, unconscious or simply exhausted beyond response. Nate sat back on his heels thinking. His cabin lay 3 days north, too far for someone in her condition. But he knew these mountains. An old line shack abandoned by trappers a decade ago stood a day's travel to the northeast. He'd sheltered there during bad weather, kept it stocked with basics against emergency. Single-room stone fireplace. Stream nearby. Not comfortable but functional, and remote enough that nobody would find them by accident. He returned to the mule-pulled rope from his pack and cut 2 straight saplings from the scrub. 10 minutes later, he'd lashed together a rough travois, padded it with all the blankets he carried. The transfer from ground to travois made her cry out, even in unconsciousness, small whimpers of pain that reminded him of Emma when she'd been feverish. The mule didn't like pulling an unaccustomed load, but Nate had traded for a patient animal. They started north as the sun began its descent toward the western peaks. Progress came slow. The travois couldn't handle rough ground. He had to pick their route carefully, avoiding rocks and gullies that would jar her broken ribs. Every 100 yards, he stopped to check her breathing, to give her water, if she could swallow, to adjust the blankets against the heat. Night fell when they were still 2 hours from the line shack. He couldn't risk traveling in darkness, not over unfamiliar ground with an injured woman. He made cold camp in a grove of scrub pine, no fire to mark their location. Wrapped the nun in all his blankets, held her through the night to share body heat, because hypothermia killed as surely as any injury once the desert cold set in. She shook with tremors through the darkness, lost in nightmares that made her cry out. No, please, not the children, Father Crow, please. The name registered. Father Crow, a priest. Either the man who'd done this or connected to it somehow. Nate filed the information away and held her as she thrashed, keeping her still enough that broken ribs wouldn't shift and pierce something vital. Dawn came cold and clear. He gave her more water, which she took without waking pure reflex. Then they moved again. The line shack appeared at midday, exactly where memory placed it. 12 by 10 feet, built of weathered pine logs and chinked with mud. The roof sagged in places, but still kept weather out. A stone fireplace occupied one wall, and the sleeping platform that ran along another still held ancient pine boughs, dry and brittle but serviceable. One window, oiled paper intact, let in filtered light. The door hung crooked but closed. 50 yards downhill, a stream ran cold and clear. Nate got her inside first, then started a fire. Once warmth began filling the small space, he turned to the real work. Boiling water, precious soap from his supplies, carefully preserved for exactly this kind of need. Clean cloths torn from his spare shirt. Carbolic acid, the miracle antiseptic he'd learned about during the war, though it burned like concentrated hellfire when applied to open wounds. He worked through the afternoon and into evening, cleaned every visible injury, bound her ribs with canvas strips tight enough to support but not so tight she couldn't breathe. The brand on her shoulder required the most care. Infection had already started at the edges, red and angry. He cleaned it with boiled water, applied honey as an antiseptic, the way Grey Dove had taught him, then covered it with a poultice of crushed yarrow leaves and pine resin. She woke briefly while he worked on the brand, her eyes open to slits, unfocused. Where? Safe, remote cabin. Nobody knows you're here. They'll find... Not here, they won't. Rest. Her eyes tried to focus on his face. Failed. The children. Orphans. Father Crow sold them. Then consciousness left her again. But Nate had heard enough. Children being sold. By a priest. He sat back and stared at the woman he'd committed to saving. What had she stumbled into? What kind of evil wore a collar and sold children? And more importantly, what was he going to do about it? Through the first 3 days, she balanced on a knife edge between life and death. Fever spiked on the second day, the brand infection spreading despite his treatment. Nate forced feverfew tea down her throat, changed poultices every 4 hours, monitored her breathing for the rattle that meant pneumonia. On the third day, the fever broke. She woke that evening truly conscious for the first time since he'd found her. Her eyes opened, both of them now, though one remained half swollen. She looked around the unfamiliar cabin, confusion giving way to fear, fear to cautious assessment. Where am I? Nate sat in the corner cleaning his rifle, giving her space. Line shack, 3 days into the Sierra Nevada. My name's Nate Bridger. She tried to sit. Pain stopped her cold, a gasp escaping before she could control it. Easy. 3 cracked ribs, maybe 4. Bran wound on your shoulder. You were beaten badly. Her hand moved to her shoulder, felt the bandage there. Memory returned. He watched it happen, saw the moment when everything came back. Tears began tracking down her bruised face. How long since you found me? 4 days. 4? Her voice broke. They left me. They thought I'd die. They nearly got their wish. Who did this? Fear crossed her face, sharp and immediate. I can't tell you. I shouldn't. You'll be in danger. Already in danger. Found you with a Pacific Consortium brand. That means trafficking, which means serious people. So whoever did this is already a problem for me. Her eyes widened. You know about the consortium. Army heard rumors during the war. Girls disappearing into San Francisco brothels. All of them branded. You escaped them. The tears came harder now. It wasn't me they wanted. The orphans. The children. The words hung in the small room. Outside wind moved through pines. The fire crackled. Nate set down the rifle parts he'd been cleaning and gave her his full attention. Tell me. The story emerged slowly over the next hours. She had to stop frequently to rest, to drink water, to master emotions that threatened to overwhelm her. But piece by piece, she laid out a picture of evil that made Nate's blood run cold. Her name was Sister Mary Catherine. Born Catherine Rose Brennan in County Cork, Ireland. 26 years old. Came to America at 17 with her family fleeing the last gasps of famine. Lost parents and 3 siblings to typhoid fever during the crossing. Arrived in San Francisco alone, orphaned, terrified. The Sisters of St. Joseph took her in, fed her, clothed her, gave her purpose when she had none. At 19, grieving and lost, she took vows. Became Sister Mary Catherine, assigned to St. Joseph's Mission in the Sacramento Valley. The mission ran an orphanage and school. 43 children at its peak. Some true orphans, others from families too poor to feed them. The sisters did their best with limited resources, teaching the children to read and write, preparing them for lives as laborers or domestic servants. 6 months ago, Father Matthias Crow arrived, transferred from a wealthy San Francisco parish sent by the diocese to improve mission finances. Smooth, educated, connected to important families. The kind of priest who dined with senators and had bishops' ears. Mother Superior Agnes had resisted his authority at first, but the bishops insisted. Father Crow took over financial management. Sister Catherine helped with the books, had always had a head for numbers. She noticed discrepancies within a month. Donations that Crow claimed to have received but never appeared in accounts. Supply purchases inflated by 50% or more. The Children's Fund carefully built over years, depleting at an alarming rate. She investigated quietly. Found a hidden ledger in Crow's office while cleaning. What she read there turned her blood to ice. Father Crow wasn't embezzling. He was selling children. The ledger documented everything with careful precision. Names of girls ages 10 to 14 selected for their looks. Amounts paid, usually $500 each. Destinations coded but clear enough once you understood the system. All of them ended in San Francisco at addresses Sister Catherine recognized from newspaper reports about brothel raids. Over 6 months, 17 girls had disappeared. Families told they had been adopted by wealthy benefactors. In reality, sold to the Pacific Consortium, branded, shipped to brothels where they'd be used until disease or violence killed them. Sister Catherine brought the evidence to Mother Superior Agnes. The old nun confronted Father Crow privately, demanded he leave the mission, threatened to contact the Archbishop. 3 days later, Mother Superior fell down the mission stairs. Broken neck, dead instantly. Sister Catherine knew it was murder. Father Patrick Sullivan, the younger Irish priest, knew it too. But who would believe them against Father Crow with his connections and charm? They planned carefully. Catherine would take the ledger to the federal marshal in Sacramento. It would have to be federal because the local sheriff was certainly on Crow's payroll. The evidence was damning. Even with Crow's connections, it would force an investigation. The night before she was to leave, Crow's men came. 2 sheriff's deputies, both men she recognized from Mass. They dragged her from her cell. threw her in a wagon, drove for 2 days into the wilderness, Father Crow himself riding alongside. On the second night, they camped in the foothills. That's when the beating started. Crow wanted to know where the ledger was, who else knew about it, what she'd told the federal marshal. Sister Catherine, who'd never raised her voice in anger, who'd spent 7 years in quiet service, found a core of steel she didn't know she possessed. She told them nothing. So they beat her, burned her with cigars. Crow himself put the brand on her shoulder, pressing the hot iron into her flesh while she screamed. This is what happens to those who interfere, he told her. You're nobody, an Irish immigrant nun, who will miss you, who will ask questions. The children you tried to save will bring better prices now that you're gone. They left her in the ravine, assumed the heat and injuries would finish what they'd started. Rode away laughing. And then you found me, Sister Catherine finished. Her voice had gone hoarse from talking. Against all odds, you found me. Nate absorbed the story in silence. His face showed nothing an old cavalry scout's mask, but inside rage burned cold and focused. He'd seen evil during the war. Men who killed for pleasure, who tortured prisoners, who violated every law of civilized conduct. But this felt worse somehow. A priest who sold children, deputies who enabled him, a system so corrupt that a nun couldn't trust anyone. This ledger, he said finally, where is it now? Hidden. At the mission. Only I know the location. The children who are left. How many? 26 when I left. But Crow was selecting 3 more girls. He works in batches, you see, spaces out the disappearances so families don't suspect a pattern. And he's still operating business as usual. Unless someone stopped him, but who would believe a nun over a priest with the bishop's protection? Nate stood, walked to the window, looked out at darkening pines. When he turned back, his face held something that made Sister Catherine catch her breath. Not anger exactly, something colder, more dangerous. Here's what's going to happen, he said. You're going to heal, properly. That means weeks, maybe months. Can't go back weak. Can't fight Crow without strength. But the children will be safer if we're patient. Crow thinks you're dead. That gives us an advantage. We use it. He crossed back to her. I'm going to teach you things. How to survive out here. How to defend yourself. How to shoot ride track. When spring comes, we go back. Get the ledger. Expose Crow. But we do it right, which means doing it prepared. Sister Catherine stared at him. Months here alone with you. The impropriety hung between them, unspoken but massive. I'll sleep outside, Nate said. We'll maintain proper. I'm not worried about my reputation, Mr. Bridger. Her voice was soft but steady. I'm worried about my heart. The admission surprised them both. Silence stretched. The fire popped. Outside, an owl called hunting. We both lost people, Nate said finally. We both know grief. Maybe we're meant to help each other heal before facing what's ahead. Sister Catherine nodded slowly. Months, then, we prepare. And when spring comes, we end Father Crow's evil. She extended her hand, the gesture formal, despite her injuries. Nate took it. Her fingers felt small in his fragile, yet he remembered how she'd refused to tell Crow anything, despite torture. Fragile didn't mean weak. Partners, he said. Partners, she agreed. But as their hands remained clasped a moment longer than necessary, both knew the truth. Months alone together in a remote mountain cabin would test Sister Catherine's vows in ways the convent had never prepared her for. And Nate, who'd sworn never to let anyone close again after losing Sarah and Emma, felt something in his chest that had been frozen for 5 years, beginning against all wisdom to thaw. The first lesson came the morning after their agreement. Sister Catherine woke to find Nate gone, the cabin empty, except for dying embers in the fireplace. Panic seized her briefly, the thought that perhaps he'd reconsidered, that she'd wake to find herself abandoned again. Then the door opened. He carried an armload of deadfall pine bark still clinging to the weathered wood. Dropped it beside the fireplace without ceremony. Get up, he said. Time to learn. She struggled to sitting ribs, protesting. Learn what? Fire. Can't rely on me being here every morning. Fire means life in the mountains. No fire, you freeze or starve or both. He knelt beside the cold fireplace, began arranging kindling with practiced efficiency. Small twigs first arranged in a loose teepee. larger pieces leaning against them, space for air to flow. Watch, I'll do this once. Then you do it. From his possibles bag, he produced flint steel in a piece of char cloth. The fabric burned to the edge of combustion. He struck steel against flint, sending sparks cascading onto the char cloth. One caught. A tiny orange glow spread through the fabric. He transferred the glowing cloth to a bundle of dry grass and pine needles, cupped it in his hands, blew gently. Smoke rose. He continued blowing, patient, steady. Flame burst to life. He fed it into the kindling teepee, watched it catch and grow. Your turn. Build another fire beside mine. Sister Catherine's hands shook as she tried to replicate his movements. The flint felt awkward, the steel unfamiliar. She struck them together. Nothing. Tried again. The angle was wrong. Again. Again. Patience, Nate said. Strike true, not hard. 20 attempts, 30. Her fingers began to blister from gripping the steel. Frustration built until she wanted to throw the implements across the cabin. I can't do this. Yes, you can. Again. My hands hurt. Frostbite hurts worse. Again. She struck the steel. A spark landed on the char cloth. Caught. The tiny glow spreading like a sunrise across the blackened fabric. She transferred it to the tinder bundle with trembling hands, held it the way he had, blew softly. Nothing happened. Keep blowing, gentle, patient. She blew. The glow brightened. Smoke rose. She blew again, hope building. Then flame, sudden and fierce, spreading through the dried grass. She almost dropped it in surprise, but Nate's hand steadied hers, guided the burning bundle into her prepared kindling. The fire caught, grew, filled the small cabin with warmth and light. She looked at him, triumph on her bruised face. He nodded once, approval that felt better than any praise she'd received in 7 years of convent life. Good. Tomorrow you do it faster. The days settled into rhythm. Mornings meant fire building until she could produce flame within 3 strikes. Then came water hauling from the stream, both of them making multiple trips to fill the 2 buckets Nate kept. The work built strength, and her weakened body taught her to move, despite the ache of healing ribs. Afternoons brought foraging. Nate walked her through the forest surrounding their cabin, pointing out plants with the same matter-of-fact instruction he brought to everything. Wild onion, smell it, tastes similar to regular onion, but stronger, grows near water. He dug one up, brushed dirt from the small, white bulb, offered it to her. She bit into it. Sharp flavor flooded her mouth, making her eyes water. Good, now find 3 more without my help. She searched the stream bank using smell as much as sight. Found 2 easily. The third took longer, hidden under a rotting log. She brought them back like trophies. Now this. He indicated a plant with broad leaves and small white flowers. Death camas. Looks like wild onion. Kills you dead in about 6 hours. Difference is in the leaves. See how these grow. 3 in a bunch, not scattered like onion. He made her examine both plants side by side, learn the subtle differences that meant survival or death. Then tested her, pointing to various plants throughout the forest, making her identify them as food or poison. Within a week, she could recognize a dozen edible plants, knew which mushrooms were safe, and which would stop. Her heart understood that wilderness provided for those who learned its language. The lessons expanded. How to read weather in cloud formations to predict rain from the way pine cones closed. How to find direction from moss on trees, from the angle of sun, through branches from star positions at night. How to dig a seep hole near a stream to get filtered water. How to construct a shelter from pine boughs and bark if she ever needed one. Nate taught like a man who assumed she might need these skills to survive alone. Sister Catherine learned like a woman who knew he was probably right. But the hardest lessons came in the 2nd week when he brought out the horses. He'd retrieved them from where he'd left his mule, collected 2 additional horses he apparently kept pastured in a hidden meadow. One was a patient mare, older, steady, perfect for someone who'd never ridden. Ever been on a horse, he asked. Sister Catherine looked at the animal, which seemed impossibly tall. In Ireland once, I was 7, I fell off. Then you already know the important part. Falling won't kill you. He showed her how to approach the mare, let the animal smell her, become familiar with her presence. How to place the bit, how the bridle worked. The saddle came next, heavy leather, worn smooth from use. Left foot in stirrup, grab the horn, pull yourself up and swing right leg over. She tried, failed. The horse was too tall, her body still too weak. Tried again, managed to get her foot in the stirrup but couldn't pull herself high enough. Nate's hands went to her waist, steadying her. Use your legs. Push up from the stirrup. The contact sent awareness through her like lightning. His hands large and warm, even through the fabric of her borrowed shirt. His body close behind hers, solid, strong, radiating heat in the cool mountain air. She pushed up, swung her leg over, settled into the saddle, suddenly much higher than expected. Their eyes met. His hands remained on her waist a moment longer than necessary. She saw something in his expression that made her breath catch, something that had nothing to do with horsemanship. He stepped back quickly. Good. Now hold the reins like this. The moment passed, but its echo remained humming in the air between them. The mare was patient, thank God, walked in gentle circles around the clearing, while Sister Catherine learned to find her balance to move with the animal instead of fighting it. She fell twice that first day, once when the mare sidestepped a snake, and once when her own inattention let her slide sideways. Both times Nate was there helping her up, checking for injury, getting her back on the horse before fear could take root. Everyone falls, he said after the second time. Only fools stay down. By the second week, she could mount without help, guide the mare through basic turns, manage a trot without falling. The accomplishment felt enormous, a reclaiming of capability she'd forgotten she possessed. But nothing prepared her for the day Nate brought out the pistol. They stood in a clearing downstream from the cabin. He'd set up 3 tin cans on a fallen log 20 feet away. In his hand, he held a small revolver, much lighter than the massive Colt 45 he carried at his hip. I can't, Sister Catherine said immediately. The commandment says thou shalt not murder. Doesn't say thou shalt not defend yourself or innocent people. He offered her the pistol. Crow's men won't hesitate to kill you. You hesitate, you die. Maybe you take innocent people with you. She thought of the children, 26 still at the mission. 3 more selected for sale, girls with braids and gap-toothed smiles who'd never chosen any of this. Her hand closed on the pistol grip. It's heavier than it looks, Nate said. Use both hands. Thumb pulls the hammer back. See now, aim. Don't look at the gun, look at the target. Breathe out. Squeeze the trigger, don't pull. She tried to follow his instructions. The pistol shook in her hands. The hammer was stiff, requiring more force than she expected. She aimed at the center, breathed out, squeezed. The explosion shocked her. The recoil jerked her hands up. The bullet went wild, kicking up dirt 10 feet to the left of the target. Again. I missed completely. So you did. Again, huh? An hour later, her hands ached and her ears rang despite the cotton wool Nate had given her. She'd fired 30 rounds. Hit a can exactly once more by accident than skill. Terrible, she said, frustration making her voice sharp. Adequate for someone who'd never held a gun yesterday. Tomorrow you'll be better. And she was. And the day after that, better still. By the end of the 3rd week, she could hit the cans with reasonable consistency. Not fast, not graceful, but capable. Enough to defend herself at close range if necessary. But the lesson that changed everything came on a warm afternoon in the 4th week when Nate taught her to fight. Gun's good if you have distance, he said, but Crow's men might grab you, might get close before you can draw. Need to know how to hurt a man with just your hands. He showed her the vulnerable points, eyes always, throat, solar plexus, groin, places where a small woman could hurt a large man if she struck true and didn't hesitate. Try it. Come at me like you're trying to get away. Sister Catherine hesitated. The idea of striking him even in practice felt wrong. Catherine, in a real fight, you won't have time to think. Your body needs to know what to do. Now come at me. She rushed him half-heartedly. He caught her wrists easily, held her immobilized. Pathetic. You want to save those children? You want to stop Crow? Then fight like you mean it. Something in his voice sparked anger. She jerked against his grip, tried to pull free. He held her easily. She twisted, trying to break his hold the way he'd shown her. Nothing worked. Frustration boiled over. She stopped thinking and just moved. Drove her knee up toward his groin. He blocked it, but the movement gave her an opening. She slammed her forehead into his chin. Pain exploded through her skull, but his grip loosened. She tore one hand free, went for his eyes with her nails. He caught her wrist twisted, and suddenly they were falling. The ground rushed up. He turned at the last second, taking the impact on his shoulder, but she landed on top of him, both of them breathing hard. For a moment, neither moved. She was acutely aware of every point where their bodies touched. His hands on her wrists, his chest rising and falling beneath her. The way his eyes held hers, brown and intense, and filled with something that made her heart race for reasons having nothing to do with the fight. "That's better," he said, his voice rough. "That's the fighter I need you to be." She couldn't look away, couldn't move. The air between them felt charged, dangerous, full of possibilities that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. Then reality crashed back. She scrambled off him, stood on shaking legs. "I need to check the fire," she said, the excuse ridiculous but necessary. She walked away without looking back, but felt his gaze on her the entire distance to the cabin. That night, kneeling on the pine bough bed, while Nate slept outside despite the cold, Sister Catherine prayed with desperate intensity. "Dear Lord, I don't know what to feel. I took sacred vows, promised myself to you, but my heart pulls toward him. He's good, Lord, truly good. He could have left me to die but chose mercy, chose danger to help children he's never met. Isn't that your work through him?" The cabin walls offered no answer. The fire crackled. Outside, an owl called hunting in the darkness. "Show me the path," she whispered. "Please, I'm lost." But if God answered, she couldn't hear him over the sound of her own confused heart. The weeks blurred together as summer gave way to autumn. The aspen turned gold, then fell, leaving skeletal branches against bright blue sky. Morning frost made the grass crunch underfoot. They began preparing for winter, though Nate said they'd leave before the heavy snows came. Sister Catherine transformed. The bruises faded to yellow, then disappeared entirely. Her ribs healed, letting her move without pain. The brand on her shoulder scarred over ugly, but no longer oozing. Her hands developed calluses from work. Her arms grew stronger from hauling water and splitting kindling. The sun turned her skin brown despite the habit she'd abandoned in favor of practical buckskin and homespun. She could start a fire in 2 strikes, could ride the mare through rough country without conscious thought, could identify 40 different plants in which were food, which medicine, which poison, could shoot the pistol with enough accuracy to hit a man-sized target at 20 feet, could remember the vulnerable points in hand-to-hand fighting and strike them without hesitation when Nate tested her. But the internal transformation went deeper than skills. 7 years in the convent had taught her obedience, submission, the quieting of self in service to something larger. The mountain taught different lessons: self-reliance, capability, the knowledge that survival demanded action, not prayer. One evening in early October, they sat by the fire after supper. Nate cleaned his rifle with practiced motions. Catherine mended a tear in her shirt, her stitches growing more competent each day. "Tell me about your wife," she said quietly. He looked up, surprise crossing his features. He never spoke about Sarah, never. But something in Catherine made him want to break that silence. "Sarah was light," he said finally, his hands stilling on the rifle. "Where I was dark." She laughed easily, loved completely. "Made me want to be a better man than I was." "How did you meet?" "Fort Laramie. Her father ran the sutler's store. I was scouting for the cavalry. Shouldn't have worked. I was rough, she was refined. But it did." "And your daughter," by Emma. The name came out like a prayer. 4 years old. Had her mother's laugh, my stubborn streak. Curious about everything. Would follow me around asking 100 questions a day. His voice roughened. Cholera took them in 3 days. I was 100 miles away tracking a Cheyenne raiding party. Rode back to find 2 graves and a note from Sarah saying she loved me and asking me to forgive her for leaving. Catherine's hand covered his instinctive comfort. "I'm so sorry. Long time ago." Grief doesn't follow time's rules. He looked at her, saw understanding in her eyes. She knew loss, knew the way it carved holes in a person that never quite filled. "Your family," he asked. "Typhoid. During the crossing from Ireland. Mother, father, baby brother, all within a week. I was 17 alone in a country I didn't understand. The sisters took me in, gave me purpose when I had none. Did you choose religious life, or did it choose you?" The question cut to something she'd been avoiding for months. "I thought I chose it. Now I wonder if I was just hiding, too scared to face the world that had taken everything. Nothing wrong with hiding when you need to heal." But staying hidden forever, that's cowardice. You're not a coward. You stood up to Crow. And look where it got me. It got you here, Ben. His hand turned under hers, fingers interlacing. Learning you're stronger than you knew, that's worth something. Their hands remained joined. Neither pulled away. The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. Nate, she began, then stopped. The words stuck in her throat. Words that once spoken couldn't be taken back. Don't, he said, his voice rough with something that might have been pain or longing or both. Don't say it. You're a nun. I'm nobody. We can't go where this is heading. What if I'm not sure I want to be a nun anymore? What if the vows were a mistake? He met her eyes directly. That's something you need to decide. Not because of me, because of you. What you want, what God wants from you. I won't be the reason you break sacred vows. She nodded slowly, withdrew her hand. You're right. I'm sorry. Nothing to apologize for. But when she went inside and he remained by the fire, both knew the truth. The line between them had worn thin as paper. One more touch, one more moment of weakness, and everything would change. October brought the decision they'd been avoiding. The first real snow dusted the high peaks. The nights grew cold enough that Nate's breath frosted even inside the cabin. Time was running out. We need to go soon, he said one morning. Another few weeks and passes will close. We'll be trapped till spring. Sister Catherine nodded. She'd known this was coming. I'm ready. Are you? He studied her. Going back means facing Crow. Means danger, maybe death. Last chance to stay here, stay safe. Those children aren't safe. As long as I'm hiding, Crow keeps selling them. She met his gaze steadily. I'm ready. They spent 3 days planning. The route would take them west and south, skirting settlements where someone might recognize Sister Catherine. 5 days hard riding to reach the Sacramento Valley. Another day to the mission. The evidence, Nate said. Hey, where exactly is it hidden? The mission church has a statue of St. Joseph. Behind it, there's a loose stone in the wall. The ledger's in a waterproof pouch in the cavity. And Father Sullivan, you trust him completely. With my life, he tried to protect me. Failed, but he tried. Then we get Sullivan first. He retrieves the ledger during a service when people are there. Witnesses, Crow can't make him disappear in front of a congregation. Then what? Then we take everything to the federal marshal. Not local law, federal. Crow can't buy everyone. It was a good plan, simple, which meant fewer things could go wrong. But Sister Catherine couldn't shake the feeling they were missing something, some piece of Crow's network they didn't see. They left on a clear October morning, 2 horses packed with minimal supplies. The line shack stood empty behind them, that small space where 2 broken people had found something neither expected. Will you come back here? Catherine asked as they rode away. Nate looked back once. Probably not. Some places are meant for a moment, not a lifetime. The words felt like goodbye to more than just the cabin. The journey took 6 days instead of 5. They moved carefully, avoiding main trails, camping in hidden clearings. Twice they saw riders in the distance and detoured widely. Crow might believe Catherine dead, but he'd have people watching for any sign she'd survived. Sister Catherine rode well now, keeping pace without complaint, even when old injuries ached from long hours in the saddle. She'd braided her dark hair, wore a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed her face. In buckskin and homespun, she looked like any frontier woman traveling with her husband. The thought shouldn't have pleased her, but it did. On the 5th night camped in heavy timber, she asked the question that had been building. After this is done, after Crow is arrested and the children are safe, what happens to us? Nate poked the fire, sending sparks spiraling. What do you want to happen? I don't know. Everything I was taught says I should return to the convent, resume my vows, dedicate my life to God's service. That's what you should do. What do you want to do? Oh. She looked at him across the flames. His face showed nothing, that old scout's mask firmly in place. But she'd learned to read the small signs, the tension in his shoulders, the way he gripped the stick he was using to tend the fire. I want to be free, she said quietly. I want to choose my own path, not hide behind vows taken when I was too young and too scared to know what I really wanted. And if you choose that path, what then? I don't know, maybe work with orphans again, but on my own terms. Maybe stay in the mountains, help travelers, teach children. Maybe, she hesitated. Maybe see where this thing between us leads. There, she'd said it. Put words to what they'd been dancing around for months. Nate stared into the fire for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was careful, measured. I care for you, more than I should, more than I intended. But Catherine, I'm a hard man to love. I've got darkness in me from the war, from losing Sarah and Emma. I live alone because it's easier than letting people close enough to hurt me again. I know. I have darkness too. We both do. And if you choose to leave the church, you'll lose everything. The sisters support the church's protection. You'll be alone. I'll have you. The words hung between them, heavy with promise and risk. Yeah, he said finally, you will. They didn't speak more that night. But when she lay down to sleep, his hand found hers in the darkness, and they stayed that way until dawn. St. Joseph's Mission appeared on the seventh day, a cluster of adobe buildings around a white church, its bell tower visible for miles across the valley floor. Catherine's breath caught at the sight. Home for 7 years. Scene of her greatest joy and worst nightmare. They stopped a mile out, hidden in a grove of cottonwoods. Father Sullivan, how do we contact him without alerting Crow? Catherine thought. There's a boy, Miguel. He helps in the church. If we can get a message to him, he'll find Father Sullivan. Can he be trusted? He's 10, and Father Sullivan saved his mother from a bad situation. He'd walk through fire for the father. Nate nodded. Then we wait for evening service. Lots of people. You stay hidden. I'll find the boy. Waiting felt like torture. Catherine watched the mission from their hiding place, saw children in the yard recognize faces. Younger ones who'd been barely walking when she left. Where were the older girls, the ones Crow would have selected? Evening finally came. People began gathering for Vespers, families in their Sunday clothes, despite it being Thursday. The mission held services 3 times a week, more during feast days. Nate rode out alone, looking like any drifter, seeking a meal and maybe salvation. Catherine watched until he disappeared into the church, then settled back to wait, pistol in her lap, every muscle tense. He returned an hour later with a small figure behind him. The boy Miguel, his dark eyes huge with fear and excitement. Sister Catherine, he whispered. Everyone said you were dead. She embraced him quickly. Almost was. Miguel, I need you to get Father Sullivan. Tell him to meet us here. Tonight. Tell him the sister who died has evidence that will end Father Crow. The boy nodded, already moving. He's hearing confessions till 8. After that he takes his walk. I'll bring him. He disappeared into the darkness like smoke. They waited. Catherine's hands shook. Nate checked his pistol. The Sharps rifle made sure everything was loaded and ready. At 8:30, 2 figures approached through the cottonwoods. Father Patrick Sullivan and young Miguel. The priest looked older than Catherine remembered. Deep lines bracketed his mouth. His reddish hair had gone gray at the temples. But his eyes, when they fell on her, filled with tears. Mary and Joseph, he breathed in his thick Irish brogue. They said you'd been killed. Crow said wild animals. Crow left me for dead. This man found me. She gestured to Nate. Father, we have evidence. Crow's ledger showing every girl he sold. We need to retrieve it and take it to the federal marshal. Father Sullivan's face hardened. He's taken 3 more since you disappeared. 3 more girls gone to San Francisco. I've tried to stop him, but the bishop... His voice broke. I've failed them. You haven't failed anyone, Catherine said firmly. But now we act. The ledger is behind St. Joseph's statue. Can you retrieve it during tomorrow's service? With witnesses present? I can, but Catherine, you should know. Crow's been asking questions, offering money for information about a woman matching your description. He doesn't believe you're dead. The words sent ice through Catherine's veins. Then we move fast. Get the ledger tomorrow. We'll wait here. Bring it directly after service. Father Sullivan nodded, started to leave, then turned back. Catherine, these months you've been gone, the vows you took, do they still bind you? The question hung in the cool evening air. She felt Nate tense beside her. I don't know, Father. I'm not sure they ever truly did. Understanding and sadness crossed the priest's face. Then may God guide you to truth, child, whatever form it takes. He blessed her, blessed Nate, despite the mountain man's obvious discomfort, and disappeared back toward the mission. Morning came with fog thick enough to cut. Catherine and Nate waited in the cottonwood grove, every nerve stretched tight. The mission bell rang for morning service. Through the bay, they heard voices singing the familiar rhythms of Mass. Then gunshots. 3 sharp cracks unmistakable in the quiet morning. Nate was moving before the echoes faded, Catherine right behind him. They ran toward the mission weapons drawn, abandoning all caution. The church doors stood open. People streamed out, screaming, running. Inside chaos, Father Sullivan lay at the base of St. Joseph's statue, blood spreading across his chest. In his hand, he clutched a leather-bound ledger. Standing over him, pistol still smoking, was Father Matthias Crow. No. Catherine's scream cut through the confusion. Crow's head snapped toward her, his face handsome and urbane, twisted with rage. The dead nun, I knew you'd survived, knew you'd come back. He raised his pistol toward her. Nate's Colt cleared leather faster than thought, his shot taking Crow's hand, spinning the priest around. Crow's pistol clattered across the floor. Get Sullivan, Nate barked at Catherine. Get the ledger. She ran to the fallen priest. Blood pumped from 3 wounds in his chest. Too much blood. She pressed her hands to the worst one, trying to stem the flow. Father, hold on. Help is coming. His eyes focused on her with difficulty. Took it. Got the ledger. Witnesses saw. Everyone knows now. Don't talk. Save your strength. No strength left, child. He pressed the blood-stained ledger into her hands. 43 children. Names, prices. End him. End this evil. Father, one more thing. His hand gripped hers with surprising strength. Your vows. I release you from them. Live, Catherine. Love. Don't let my failure be for nothing. You didn't fail. But Father Sullivan's eyes had already gone distant, fixed on something beyond her shoulder. His last breath came out as a sob, and then he was gone. Hands grabbed Catherine, pulled her to her feet. Nate, his face grim, the Colt still in his hand. We have to go. Now. But Father Sullivan is dead, and Crow's men are coming. Half the congregation saw what happened, but the other half are on his payroll. Move. They ran. Behind them, shouts rose. More gunfire. A bullet kicked up dirt at Catherine's feet. Nate turned, fired twice, bought them seconds. The horses waited where they'd left them. Catherine shoved the ledger into her saddlebag, mounted with hands slick with Father Sullivan's blood. They rode hard, pushing the animals, putting distance between themselves and the mission. A mile out, Catherine looked back. Smoke rose from the mission church. Crow burning evidence, probably. Burning anything that might implicate him. But he was too late. The ledger was safe, and everyone had seen him murder a priest in cold blood. She turned forward, jaw set. Father Sullivan's sacrifice wouldn't be wasted. By nightfall, this ledger would be in federal hands, and Father Matthias Crow's evil would finally face justice. Beside her, Nate rode with rifle across his saddle, eyes scanning for pursuit. Blood stained his shirt from when he'd helped move Sullivan's body. His face showed nothing, but Catherine knew him now. Knew the rage burning beneath that calm exterior. They'd lost someone good today. A man who'd tried to protect children, who'd stood against evil even when it cost him everything. But they'd won too. The evidence was secure. Witnesses had seen Crow kill Sullivan. The children could be saved. As they rode towards Sacramento and the federal marshal's office, Catherine realized something had shifted in her. The woman who'd taken vows 7 years ago seeking safety and purpose was gone. The woman who emerged from these mountains was harder, stronger, certain of her path. Father Sullivan had released her from her vows with his dying breath, but the truth was she'd already released herself. Somewhere in that cabin, somewhere in the long nights of learning to fight and survive, she'd chosen a life over hiding, chosen Nate over solitude, chosen the hard path of action over the comfortable refuge of prayer. The federal marshal's office stood ahead. Justice waited. And after justice, whatever future they could build from the ashes of who they'd been. She reached across the gap between horses, found Nate's hand. He squeezed back a promise without words. They'd face what came next together. The federal marshal's office occupied a 2-story brick building in downtown Sacramento, sturdy and official in a city still finding its permanence. Catherine and Nate tied their exhausted horses at the rail outside. The sun had barely cleared the eastern mountains. Most of Sacramento still slept, but Marshal Theodore Hewitt worked early hours, a habit formed during his years hunting outlaws across the territories. They found him at his desk reviewing wanted posters with the methodical attention that had made him one of the most respected lawmen in California. He looked up as they entered, his weathered face showing surprise at visitors so early, then sharp assessment as he registered their condition. Blood on their clothes, exhaustion in their faces, the kind of desperation that usually meant trouble. "Help you folks." His hand moved subtly toward the pistol on his desk. Nate raised his hand slightly, showing peaceful intent. "Marshal Hewitt, my name's Nathaniel Bridger. This is Catherine Brennan. We have evidence of child trafficking operating out of St. Joseph's Mission. Evidence that cost a good priest his life this morning." Hewitt's eyes narrowed. "That's a serious accusation." Catherine stepped forward, pulled the blood-stained ledger from her bag, set it on his desk. 43 children, 17 already sold to Pacific Consortium brothels in San Francisco. Names, dates, amounts paid, all recorded by the man running the operation. The marshal opened the ledger carefully. His expression didn't change as he read, but his knuckles went white where they gripped the book's edge. Page after page of children's names. Girls mostly aged 10 to 14. Purchase prices ranging from $300 to $700 depending on age and appearance. Destinations coded but clearly indicating San Francisco addresses known for prostitution. Who compiled this? His voice had gone very quiet. Father Matthias Crow, priest at St. Joseph's Mission. He's been selling orphans to the consortium for at least 6 months, probably longer. "And you know this?" How? Catherine pulled back the collar of her shirt, showed the brand on her shoulder. The PC. Letters stood out angry and permanent against her skin. "Because I discovered his operation. Because he had his men beat me and brand me and leave me for dead in the mountains. Because I'm supposed to be Sister Mary Catherine of St. Joseph's, and Father Crow told everyone I died in an accident." Marshal Hewitt stood slowly, walked around his desk, examined the brand with eyes that had seen enough evil to recognize the real thing. "How'd you survive?" "He found me." Catherine nodded toward Nate. "Saved my life. Helped me get strong enough to come back for the evidence. And this morning, Father Patrick Sullivan tried to retrieve the ledger during church service. Father Crow shot him 3 times, killed him in front of the congregation." Her voice broke. "We were too late to save him, but we got the ledger." Hewitt returned to his desk, pulled out a telegram form, began writing with swift efficiency. "I'm wiring San Francisco. Federal agents will raid those addresses within hours. We'll recover as many girls as we can." He looked up. "But I need you both to make formal statements, every detail, and I need witnesses from the mission who saw what happened this morning." "Half the congregation saw Crow murder Father Sullivan," Nate said. "The other half are probably on his payroll." "Then we'd better move fast before anyone decides to disappear." The marshal called in 2 deputies, sent them racing toward the mission with orders to secure the scene and bring back witnesses. Then he turned back to Catherine and Nate. "This is going to get complicated. Crow's got connections, wealthy family bishops, protection, political friends. He'll have expensive lawyers, but murder in front of witnesses." A grim smile crossed his face. "That's harder to explain away than financial irregularities." Catherine and Nate spent the next 4 hours giving detailed statements. Every moment from when Catherine discovered the ledger to Father Sullivan's death that morning. The marshal's deputy recorded it all in careful script pages piling up as the story unfolded. By noon, witnesses began arriving. Families from the mission, shepherded by the deputies. One by one, they confirmed the story. Father Crow raising his pistol, Father Sullivan falling. The ledger clutched in the dying priest's hand. One woman, her face wet with tears, described how her daughter had been among those adopted 6 months earlier. How she'd believed the story about a wealthy San Francisco family. How she'd never heard from her daughter again. "Her name was Maria," the woman said. 12 years old. Sweet girl who loved to sing. Is she in that book?" Marshal Hewitt checked the ledger, found the name, nodded slowly. "There's an address. We'll do everything possible to bring her home." The woman collapsed in sobs. Catherine held her while she cried, sharing grief neither could fully express. By evening, arrest warrants had been issued for Father Matthias Crow, for Sheriff Tom Dawson of the Valley District, for 3 deputies who'd helped transport children, for 2 men in San Francisco who ran the receiving end of the operation. Federal agents rode out at sunset. Catherine and Nate watched them go, a force of 20 armed men headed to the mission to arrest a priest. "It's done," Nate said quietly. "Not yet. Not until those girls are home. Not until Crow hangs." They found a boarding house, rented a room for appearance's sake, though Nate spent the night in a chair watching the door, while Catherine slept fully dressed with the pistol under her pillow. Trust came hard to people who'd seen what they'd seen. The arrests happened without violence. Crow didn't resist when federal agents surrounded the mission at dawn. The sheriff and his deputies were taken from their beds. The San Francisco conspirators proved harder to catch, but within a week, 4 of the 5 primary operators sat in Sacramento's federal jail. The trial began 3 weeks later. Catherine had never seen the inside of a courtroom. The formality intimidated her at first. Judge Marcus Whitmore presided with stern efficiency, his reputation for honesty, the reason Marshall Hewitt had pushed for federal rather than local jurisdiction. Crow's lawyers were everything Hewitt had predicted: expensive, skilled, ruthless. They attacked Catherine's character immediately: an Irish immigrant, a nun who'd abandoned her vows, a woman traveling alone with a man not her husband, clearly unstable, clearly unreliable. But they couldn't explain the ledger, couldn't explain why Crow's handwriting filled every page, couldn't explain the brand on Catherine's shoulder, or why a Pacific Consortium mark would be on a woman Crow claimed had simply left the mission. And they definitely couldn't explain the witnesses who'd seen him murder Father Sullivan. The trial lasted 4 days. Catherine testified for 6 hours, defense lawyers trying to break her story, to find inconsistencies to make her seem hysterical or vengeful. She answered every question with calm precision, the same steadiness she'd learned tracking plants in the forest and hitting targets at 20 feet. Nate testified about finding her, about her injuries, about the brand. His military record lent credibility. A decorated cavalry scout didn't lie about things like this. The mission witnesses testified. The woman whose daughter had been sold wept on the stand as she identified her child's name in the ledger. On the 4th day, the jury deliberated for 2 hours. Guilty on all counts: murder, kidnapping, human trafficking, conspiracy. Judge Whitmore sentenced Father Matthias Crow to death by hanging. The courtroom erupted, some in celebration, some in shock that a priest could receive such a sentence. Crow himself showed no emotion as they led him away, his face a mask of contempt. Outside the courthouse, Catherine stood in autumn sunshine that felt like spring after the oppressive weight of the trial. Nate appeared beside her, his hand finding hers. "It's over," he said. "Is it?" She looked at him. 26 children still need homes. 17 girls are somewhere in San Francisco traumatized, if they're even still alive. Father Sullivan is dead. Mother Superior Agnes is dead. How is it over? Because evil lost, because Crow will hang, because you survived when he wanted you dead, and you made sure he'd face justice. He squeezed her hand. "That's not nothing, Catherine." She nodded slowly. He was right. It wasn't nothing, but it also wasn't enough. The next morning, Catherine visited the bishop's residence. She'd requested the meeting through official channels, surprising herself with her own boldness. The girl who'd taken vows at 19 would never have demanded an audience with a bishop. The woman who'd survived the mountain and testified in court felt no such hesitation. Bishop James Lawrence received her in his study, a room heavy with dark wood and religious paintings. He looked uncomfortable, which gave Catherine a small satisfaction. "Sister Catherine, or should I say Miss Brennan now?" "Catherine is fine, Your Excellency. I've read the trial transcripts. Terrible business. The church is deeply sorry for what you endured." Sorry, the word felt laughably inadequate. "I'm here to formally request release from my vows." The bishop blinked. "That's highly irregular. Given the circumstances, perhaps a transfer to another convent. Time for prayer and healing." "I don't want healing in a convent. I want freedom to live the life I choose." My dear, you've been through trauma. You're not thinking clearly." "I'm thinking more clearly than I have in 7 years." She kept her voice level, respectful but firm. "I took vows when I was 17, grieving and alone. I thought I was choosing God. I was really choosing safety. I know the difference now. The church offered you sanctuary. And I'm grateful, but sanctuary isn't meant to be a prison. I want to help children, but on my own terms. I want to live honestly, not hide behind vows I never truly meant. Bishop Lawrence steepled his fingers. There's a man involved. The mountain guide, Mr. Bridger. There is, but that's not why I'm leaving. I'd leave even if he weren't in the picture. She leaned forward. Your Excellency, Father Sullivan released me from my vows with his dying breath. He saw what I couldn't admit to myself, that I was never meant for convent life. Father Sullivan wasn't authorized to release vows. Perhaps not officially, but he was a good priest who understood something the church often forgets. That God doesn't need our misery. That honest doubt is better than false devotion. The bishop was silent for a long moment. Finally, he pulled paper from his desk, began writing. Against my better judgment, I'll grant your request. The paperwork will take weeks to process through Rome, but consider yourself released from your obligations to the order effective immediately. Relief flooded through her. Thank you, Your Excellency. Don't thank me. I think you are making a terrible mistake. But Father Sullivan was right about one thing. Forcing people into vocations they don't want helps no one. Catherine stood. At the door, she turned back. The children at St. Joseph's. What happens to them? We're working with civil authorities to find proper placements. It will take time. I'd like to help, not as a sister, just as someone who cares. I'll make note of your offer. She left the bishop's residence with papers declaring her no longer Sister Mary Catherine of the Order of St. Joseph, just Catherine Rose Brennan. Free woman, her own person. The weight that lifted felt like shedding armor she'd worn so long she'd forgotten it was there. She found Nate at the boarding house cleaning his rifle in their room. He looked up as she entered, read everything in her face. You did it. I did, Buen. She showed him the papers. I'm officially not a nun anymore. He set down the rifle, crossed to her, pulled her into his arms. They stood like that for a long moment, holding each other, both understanding how much this meant. What now? He asked it finally. Now we decide what comes next, together. They talked late into the night, planning a future neither had expected to have. Nate's cabin was too remote, too isolated for what Catherine wanted to do. But there was another option, a trading post that old Henderson wanted to sell. Located where mountain met valley, it served trappers and settlers, a crossroads where people passed through regularly. We could run it together, Nate said. You manage the business side. I handle supplies guide work when needed. And you could teach children. Families come through regularly. Most can't read or write. You could change that. A trading post and a school. Why not? Building doesn't care what we use it for. Catherine smiled. For the first time since childhood, imagining a future felt like boring instead of duty. The purchase took a month to finalize. Henderson sold them the trading post for $600 money Catherine had received as compensation from the church for her ordeal. The building needed work, but Nate knew construction, and Catherine learned fast. They married on a cold December morning, 3 months after Crow's trial. A civil ceremony, nothing religious. Marshal Hewitt stood as witness, along with young Miguel from the mission who'd helped them contact Father Sullivan. Catherine wore a simple dress, dark blue wool suitable for mountain winters. No white, no veil, no illusions about purity or fresh starts. They were both too scarred for that, but honest, present, choosing each other with full knowledge of what that meant. Nate's vows were brief. I promise to stand with you, to protect what we're building, to love you as long as I draw breath. Catherine's matched his simplicity. I promise partnership, honesty, to face whatever comes together. They sealed it with a kiss that felt less like ending and more like beginning. The first winter at Bridger's trading post tested them. Snow piled 6 feet deep. Temperatures dropped below zero. They learned to work together in tight quarters, to navigate disagreements without the escape of separate spaces, to build a marriage from scratch with no model except their own intentions. Catherine taught herself bookkeeping, inventory management, customer relations. Her convent education helped, but mountain commerce had its own rules. She learned to negotiate with trappers who tried to cheat her, to spot poor quality furs, to manage supplies so they lasted between resupply runs. Nate handled the heavy work, building repairs, hauling freight, guiding hunters and survey parties into the high country. But he also proved surprisingly good with children. When families stopped for supplies, their kids gravitated toward the quiet man who could tell stories about tracking grizzlies and surviving blizzards. Catherine started her school that first spring. 3 families with children living within a day's ride. She taught them reading, writing, arithmetic, basic science. The families couldn't pay much, but they contributed what they could. Vegetables, meat, labor on the trading post. By summer, she had 7 students. By fall, 12. News spread. The trading post where the school teacher, nun, who wasn't a nun anymore, would teach your children for whatever you could afford. Where the mountain man and his wife treated everyone fairly, asked no questions about anyone's past, and kept their word. The second year brought unexpected visitors. Federal agents escorting 4 young women from San Francisco. Survivors of the trafficking ring recovered from brothels and being returned to their families. Catherine recognized one girl immediately. Maria, the 12-year-old who'd loved to sing. 13, now her eyes holding knowledge no child should possess. The reunion with Maria's mother broke and healed hearts simultaneously. The girl couldn't speak for the first hour, just clung to her mother and sobbed. But she was alive. Home. That counted for something. The other 3 girls had nowhere to go. Families scattered or dead. No homes to return to. Catherine looked at Nate across the trading post. He read the question in her eyes and nodded. "You can stay here," Catherine told the girls. "Help with the trading post. Continue your education. Stay as long as you need." They stayed, and more came. Orphans from the mission placed with Catherine and Nate by authorities who recognized the couple's commitment. Children with nowhere else to go given a chance at the trading post in the mountains. Within 3 years, Bridger's Trading Post became something more than a store. It was a school, an orphanage, a community hub. Catherine taught, counseled, mothered a rotating population of children healing from trauma. Nate provided stability, taught practical skills, offered the kind of quiet male presence that didn't threaten and didn't demand. Some children stayed months, some years. All of them left stronger than they'd arrived. In the 4th year, Catherine gave birth to a son. They named him Patrick after Father Sullivan. The boy had his father's dark hair and his mother's fierce determination. Grew up surrounded by the orphans his parents sheltered, learning early that family meant more than blood. A daughter followed 2 years later, Sarah, named for the wife Nate had lost. Then another son. And the family grew, both biological and chosen, filling the trading post with noise and life in the kind of case that meant healing. Grey Dove, the old Shoshone medicine woman who'd helped deliver Patrick, became a fixture at the post. She taught Catherine healing practices the convent had never mentioned, taught the children about plants and animals and the mountain's rhythms, became grandmother to children who'd never known grandparents. Father Crow hanged in 1875, 2 years after his trial. Catherine didn't attend the execution. Neither did Nate. They were busy with spring planting and teaching and the work of building something better than revenge. But when word reached them, Catherine stood at the window of the trading post, looking toward the valley where the mission still operated under new management. 17 girls, she said quietly. We recovered 9. 8 are still missing, either dead or so deep in that life they can't be found. Nate stood behind her, hands on her shoulders. You can't save everyone. Doesn't mean I stopped trying. No, it doesn't. The years accumulated like snow, layer upon layer, building something solid. The trading post expanded twice. The school grew until Catherine needed help bringing in other teachers for specialized subjects. The orphan program became semi-official, recognized by territorial authorities as a legitimate placement option. William came to them in 1896. 8 years old, orphaned when his parents died in a wagon accident. Nate's nephew, last of his family line. Quiet boy, traumatized by loss, struggling to find his place. Catherine and Nate took him in without hesitation. Raised him alongside their own children and the orphans who cycled through. Taught him reading and shooting and how to treat people with dignity regardless of their circumstances. He grew into a steady young man, responsible and kind. Watched his grandparents build something lasting and learned that broken things could be mended if you were patient enough. Catherine fell ill in 1903. Cancer, the doctor said. Advanced, maybe 6 months. She took the news with the same steadiness she'd brought to everything else. Made arrangements. Wrote letters to each of the children they'd helped over the years. Prepared Nate for continuing the work without her. You'll be fine, she told him one evening in late summer. They sat on the porch watching sunset paint the mountains gold. You've always been stronger than you believed. I was broken before you. I'll be broken after. No, you'll grieve. That's different. Grief means love. means what we had mattered. It mattered. God, Catherine, it mattered more than anything. She took his hand. They'd been married 29 years, not long enough, never long enough. Tell our story, she said. When I'm gone, tell William, tell anyone who'll listen. Not about me, about what's possible when you stop and help instead of riding past. I will. Promise. I promise. She died on a September morning the same month they'd first met. Nate held her hand as she went, watching the woman who'd transformed his life slip away as gently as she'd arrived. The funeral drew hundreds. Children they'd taught, now grown with families of their own. Orphans they'd sheltered, now productive citizens. Trappers and settlers and families who'd found welcome at the trading post when nowhere else would have them. They buried her on the ridge behind the trading post, beside Grey Dove, who'd passed 2 years earlier. The stone was simple. Catherine Rose Brennan Bridger, Team 47 to 1903. Teacher. Mother. Light in the darkness. Nate kept his promise. He told their story. To William. To anyone who asked how a former nun came to run a trading post with a mountain man. To people who wondered why he kept helping orphans and teaching children and maintaining the school long after it made financial sense. She showed me something he'd say, that we're all broken, all carrying damage. But broken doesn't mean finished. Sometimes the cracks are where the light gets in. 3 years after Catherine died, Nate sat in his rocking chair on a winter evening, journal open in his lap. William stood by the window, 18 years old, about to leave for San Francisco and a job with the railroad. The story had been told, the lessons shared. Now came the part that mattered most. You're afraid, Nate said, bringing them full circle to where the story began. William nodded. The city, not knowing how to deal with bad people. You'll meet men like Father Crow, respectable on the surface, evil underneath. Here's how you recognize them. Nate leaned forward. They'll tell you cruelty is necessary, that some people don't deserve dignity, that rules don't apply to them. When you hear that, you'll know you're facing a crow. What do? You document, you gather evidence, you find allies. You do it legally when possible, forcefully when necessary. But you never ride past someone who needs help. Never. Even if it's dangerous. Especially then. Because that's when help matters most. Nate stood slowly, joints protesting. Crossed to William, put his hands on the young man's shoulders. Your grandmother believed broken roads lead somewhere worth reaching. She proved it. So when San Francisco breaks you, and it will, you remember. Broken doesn't mean finished. It means you're on the road to becoming something stronger. I wish she was here. She is, in everything we built, in every child we helped, in you. They embraced. Then William picked up his valise, ready for the morning train. At the door, he turned back. The trading post. When you're gone. Should I come back and run it? Nate smiled. That's for you to decide. But it'll be here. The work continues. Someone always needs help, always will. William left the next morning. The train carried him toward a future none of them could predict. Nate returned to the trading post, to the school Catherine had built, to the orphans who still needed homes and the families who still needed supplies. At 67, he could have retired, could have sold the operation and spent his last years in comfort. Instead, he kept the promise he'd made to a dying woman on a September morning. The work continued. 4 years later, on a July afternoon in 1907, Nate collapsed in the garden Catherine had planted decades ago. His heart, worn out from 68 years of hard living, simply stopped. They found him among the tomatoes, his hand still holding the basket he'd been filling. No pain, no struggle, just an ending that came as gently as Catherine's. The funeral rivaled hers in size. William returned from San Francisco, now a successful engineer, fighting corruption in the railroad company. Brought stories about exposing embezzlement, protecting workers, using the lessons his grandparents had taught. He showed me what a man could be, William said at the graveside. Strong but gentle, capable but humble, willing to fight but preferring to build. They buried Nate beside Catherine, their stones matching in simplicity. Nathaniel Bridger, 1839 to 1907, scout, protector, builder of lives. And below both stones, a shared inscription. They stopped when others rode past. The trading post continued under new management. The school expanded. The orphan program became a model for territorial child welfare. The work they'd started rippled outward like stones thrown in still water, touching lives they'd never meet, changing futures they'd never see. 20 years after Nate's death, and an old woman visited the trading post. She'd been one of the 17 girls sold to San Francisco brothels. One of the ones they'd recovered. She'd gone on to become a teacher herself, helping other survivors. She stood at the graves on the ridge, tears streaming down her weathered face. "You saved me," she whispered. "Not just my body, my soul. You showed me broken things could heal. Thank you." The wind moved through the pines. Below, children's voices rose from the school. The trading post bustled with activity. Life continuing, growing, spreading light into darkness. 100 years later, historians would debate details, argue about dates and names and exactly how many children the Bridgers had helped. But the core story remained consistent. A mountain man who stopped for a dying nun. A woman who chose action over hiding. A partnership that built something lasting from brokenness. Their graves still stood on the ridge, weathered, but tended by descendants who never knew them, but honored their legacy. And in towns across California, in families who traced their lineage back to orphans, given second chances in schools built on the model Catherine created, the work continued. Because some stories don't end with the last page. Some stories become foundations, become the ground other people build on. And on winter evenings when snow fell thick and families gathered close, the old ones still told the tale. About the mountain man and the nun who wasn't. About broken roads and second chances. About the simple truth that stopped being simple the moment you tried to live it. That no matter how broken you feel, no matter who left you behind, your story isn't over until you decide it is. Catherine was left for dead, but she chose to rise, chose to fight, chose to build something better than revenge. And in choosing, she proved what mountains teach patient students. That nothing is truly lost if you're brave enough to search for it. That broken things become strongest at the mended places. That light shines brightest against deep darkness. That the road doesn't end in the valley. It just turns toward the mountain where the real work begins.